One half of my grandparents lived their life believing that the Labour Party existed for one reason above all others: to represent working people materially, culturally, and politically. They weren't perfect, they weren't always successful, but it knew who it was for. Today, Labour still claims this legacy, it wears it like a shroud. But millions of working class voters no longer recognise the party that claims to speak for them. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. But it was laid bare at the last election when the toolmaker's son struggled so much to explain what working people were. It was like this abstract philosophical concept that nobody could quite put their figure on, like what male or female is. Well, Labour was founded to do something radical for its time, to give political power to people who didn't have it, to workers, trade unionists, manual labourers, communities rooted in industry, place and solidarity. You know, those things we used to have. But the party didn't just offer policies, it offered representation for these people. It spoke in their language. It wasn't abstract theory, it was a lived reality. That gave Labour its moral authority, and that authority is what they founded the modern party on. Look at the benches of the Labour Party over the last few decades, and you see less and less of those workers and more of university educated professionals, policy specialists, NGO veterans, media and public sector elites. These groups aren't evil, they're not bad people, they just don't live the same lives as workers and care staff and builders and factory workers and retail employees. They live a privileged, different life, often with an underlying pseudo-intellectual analysis of the philosophy of society. I watched Educating Rita a while ago, and one of the scenes really struck me, where they're sitting in a pub singing, and she says, there has to be more to life than this. And I thought those are the people that the Labour Party was founded to protect. And what that film was telling us in that scene is that they don't really exist anymore. Workers still exist. The working man, it's not that hard to explain here. But the working class, as they do exist today, they're worried about their pay, their job security, housing, high levels of crime, transport problems, whether they can pay their energy bill. Now, Labour's worried about language disputes and symbolic gestures and identity performance and internal purity tests, and these matter to activists, people on Twitter and NGOs, but they don't put food on the table of the workers. I had a friend who came from a working class town, and I always remember he used to say to me, it's in Labour's interest that those people don't get a better share, because heaven forbid if their life was improved, if they were levelled up, if they got jobs, not some bricked over public square with a fancy statue in their town from redevelopment budget, they might actually look at other parties as well. While it wasn't obvious when Blair expanded immigration, for decades Labour have treated any form of concern about it as racist, evil, something to be talked down to, branded as intolerant, something to be ignored, at best a potential source of new voters. But it's the working class who have been affected most by that, with lower wages, lack of housing, problems with school places, not being able to get on a list for a GP. However, Labour never want to talk about those because immigration can only ever be positive. They've changed their tone a little bit over the last year, and separate to immigration, but overlapping. Brexit. Brexit wasn't a Conservative vote. It might have been made available by the Conservatives, it might have been pushed by Conservative MPs, but the people who got Brexit over the line by voting in that referendum, well, Labour voters were the majority. It's the Labour towns in the north where 75% of people voted. If they hadn't voted for Brexit, there would definitely not have been a Brexit. But the party couldn't have it, and they made it obvious that the people were to be ignored, that they weren't to have that Brexit, that it was to be frustrated if possible. And how often did we hear the Labour Party asking why its base wanted Brexit? No, they moralised, they hesitated, and they aligned with the elites that they bring to their dinner parties. Working class voters disagreeing were a problem to be managed, not a constituency to be represented, not the foundation of their party. The red wall didn't turn on Labour, it was left behind by Labour. People had been looked down on, lectured, taken for granted. And they returned largely to Labour at the last election, because everyone left the Tories at the last election. Now they have an alternative. They have someone offering an alternative. Whether it works or not, who knows? But it's an appealing alternative to a people who've been disenfranchised. So I'd argue the Labour Party didn't lose the working class because the working class became less progressive. It's lost them over time because it stopped listening, started instructing, didn't represent them, and became movement rooted not in class, but in moral language and pseudo-intellectual piffle. I think the survival of the Labour Party in the long term is them learning that you don't represent people by correcting them. You represent people by standing with them, not above them. Until Labour learns this lesson or relearns it, the desertion of their voters is going to continue, and they have no one to blame but themselves. You might disagree, but let's see how the May elections goes and how many of those red wall seats vote for Keir.